I'm the NPS Wilderness Training Manager representative at Carhart. I do both interagency and NPS trainings, as well as technical assistance and other tasks as needed. Welcome to this session. We're going to talk about, we're going to do an overview of the concept of wilderness character, including defining the 5 tangible qualities of wilderness character. We're going to explore wilderness values and benefits, including what it takes to do some thinking on what it takes to preserve them. Stick around until the end of the 80-minute session to get a full answer to the question of what does distinguish wilderness from other public lands. And I'm going to turn it over to my collaborators to introduce themselves. So Jimmy, go ahead.
Hey, you bet. Hey, everybody. I am Jimmy Gaudry. I'm the director for the Arthur Carhart National Wilderness Training Center. We're an interagency training center focused on wilderness, located here in Missoula, Montana, if you were not aware of that. And I'm a long-term Forest Service employee before I started in this position, 30 plus years of wilderness management experience. So great to be with you all. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I can pass it to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Jimmy. Hey, everyone. My name is Michelle Tanz. I use she, her pronouns. I work for the Society for Wilderness Stewardship, which is a nonprofit organization helping put on NWSI today, actually, and I work as the Wilderness Management Director. I also do work with the Forest Service as the Wilderness Lead for the Pacific Northwest region, which is Washington and Oregon. Pass it back to you, Rob.
Thanks, Michelle. So we're going to be talking about wilderness character, wilderness values, wilderness benefits, some of the unique, what makes wilderness unique in our public land landscape. So let's talk briefly about the main purpose of wilderness that Congress identified in Section 2A of the Wilderness Act. I'm going to read a larger passage than the quote here. This is Section 2A, Statement of Policy. In order to assure that an increasing population accompanied by expanding settlement and growing mechanization does not occupy and modify all areas within the United States and its possessions, leaving no lands designated for preservation and protection in their natural condition, it is hereby declared to be the policy of the Congress to secure for the American people of present and future generations the benefits of an enduring resource of wilderness. For this purpose, there is hereby established a national wilderness preservation system to be composed of federally owned areas designated by Congress as wilderness areas, and these shall be administered for the use and enjoyment of the American people in such manner as will leave them unimpaired for the future use and enjoyment as wilderness, and so as to provide for the protection of these areas, the preservation of their wilderness character, and for the gathering and dissemination of information regarding their use and enjoyment as wilderness. That's the end of the quote from the Wilderness Act. So this is what turns out to be a fairly complex and nuanced task that Congress has handed the agencies that administer wilderness. It's a long-term commitment to future generations to have the same benefits of wilderness that past and current generations do. But what are these benefits that we're supposed to secure? So we're going to identify some of these shortly. And today we'll spend some time exploring benefits through our own personal values. After all, a benefit is something that we value. Later in this webinar, we'll define what wilderness character is and why it is important, and ultimately answer the question of what distinguishes wilderness from other public lands. So I've picked this picture. This is I really value spending time with my family in the wilderness. This is my wife and my daughter backpacking in the Zoe Bitterroot Wilderness a couple of summers ago. So I also want to posit this statement to you now. We'll explore this throughout the webinar, that this is my thesis to you, that preserving wilderness character is how we secure the benefits of an enduring resource of wilderness. Okay, so there's a book called The Multiple Values of Wilderness. It's kind of a compilation by several different authors, including Cordell is the main author, editor. um, published in 2005. And in one of the chapters, they identified 4 value accounts or categories of wilderness values. And these are useful. I picked up on these because I think they're useful as they provide intuitive categories to brainstorm specific values and benefits of wilderness. And these 4 value accounts are ecologic, economic, social benefits that are values that are non-economic, and ethical, philosophical. Here's some examples of what Americans have valued about wilderness, according to the 2007 National Survey on Recreation and the Environment. Note that ecological-based benefits like air and water quality and wildlife habitat are at the top of this list, while economic-based values like tourism are lower down. And just to give you, just kind of give you a sense of what it is I'm talking about here. So now I have a task for each of you, and take a minute here and think of something that you value or you think is a really important benefit of wilderness, and just take a couple minutes to think about that and choose one specific thing in your mind, and I'll give you a minute to think about that. I have a kind of a prepared list that I share, and this is not all inclusive by any means, but just some common benefits that are connected to wilderness areas. Yeah, cool. So we're going to transition now and talk about wilderness character. And to do that, we'll return to the Wilderness Act of 1964. And let's explore Section 4B in the Wilderness Act, which is listed under the use of wilderness areas in the Act. And let's take a look at the statement where wilderness character is mentioned twice in one sentence. And it states, each agency administering any area designated as wilderness shall be responsible for preserving the wilderness character of the area and shall so administer such area for such other purposes for which it may have been established, as also to preserve its wilderness character. So you can see there's this really strong emphasis on preserving wilderness character. An area may be established for other purposes, but you still need to preserve its wilderness character. What are some of those other purposes? Well, some of you may know this. If you jump ahead to that section of the Wilderness Act, it talks about these public purposes of recreational, scenic, scientific, educational, conservation, historical use. So those are some areas that wilderness area. Those are some purposes that wilderness areas shall be devoted to, while also while also preserving wilderness character. So it's somewhat unique that Congress designated this National Wilderness Preservation System, and it spans lands administered by 4 different agencies. And so the BLM, the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Forest Service, and the NPS all have the responsibility to uphold this primary mandate of preserving wilderness character. We'll explore that a little more with what is wilderness character? The Act doesn't explicitly define it, but what the Wilderness Act does is it does define wilderness in Section 2C. And so from that, the agencies have created a definition of wilderness character. And so there is an interagency standard in this Keeping It Wild 2 technical guide. A lot of great information in there. This document is focused on monitoring wilderness character, but the definitions we'll be exploring are used for many other purposes, such as evaluating effects and minimum requirements analysis and NEPA documents. They're used for wilderness stewardship planning and for thinking about the benefits and values of wilderness, as we'll do. So from keeping it wild too, there are three domains that intersect in a Venn diagram that help us conceptualize wilderness character. The first is that wilderness character is composed of biophysical environments, which are primarily free from modern human impact and manipulation. And next, wilderness provides personal experiences in natural environments relatively free from the encumbrances and signs of modern society. And it includes symbolic meanings of humility, restraint, and interdependence that inspire human connection with nature. And so all of those come together to fundamentally define what wilderness character is. And so, I want to point out, I think it's important to realize this is a conceptualization, right? And so the landscape, ecosystem, and our interconnected relationship with all of that is very complex and nuanced. And so, if you think about it, wilderness character as like is expressed on the landscape, it's synergistic. We can kind of use these concepts to describe it. So the actual totality of all those components that come together is greater than kind of a simple sum of all those components. So think about this as a synergistic concept as we talk about the different parts of wilderness character. So Keeping It Wild 2 talks about wilderness character having tangible and intangible values or qualities. And so intangible qualities include things like spiritual or symbolic values, philosophical or ethical meanings, or other personal values. And people frequently describe these intangibles as deeply personal things that connect us to wilderness and are often not physically present. Sometimes they're based on the physical presence of features, but it's like a place that invites a sense of adventure or a feeling of profound inspiration or an ability to more deeply connect with people or places you care about. So these are often, most compelling to us, but at the same time may be difficult to articulate. But they are subjective, right? These things I'm talking about are subjective and may differ from person to person and may change over time. So we argue that protecting the tangible qualities of wilderness character, which I'm going to talk about next, creates space and settings so that these intangible qualities can be protected and hopefully thrive. So through Keeping It Wild 2, the 4 wilderness managing agencies recognize wilderness character has 5 tangible qualities. These are from text in the Wilderness Act, further defined by the agencies, and our touchstone on that is Keeping It Wild 2. Serve to preserve intangible qualities, as I just mentioned. And so let's explore these 5 tangible qualities. Like I said, they all come from text in the Wilderness Act, from the definition of wilderness. So there you can see where they appear in Section 2C. And so first we have untrammeled, we have undeveloped, we have natural, we have outstanding opportunities for solitude or a primitive and unconfined type of recreation. And then we have other features of value. And so I'm going to dive into each of these 5 in a little bit here. So why is using this framework important? Well, it provides a common language and definitions. We're talking about 4 different agencies here with 4 different sets of policies, all interpreting the same law. You can use them to evaluate the necessity of proposed actions, inform environmental and wilderness compliance and planning processes and documents, justify management decisions and actions, like put in terms of wilderness character qualities. And Keeping It Wild 2 was really focused on assuring consistent and accurate monitoring across all the agencies. So these 5 qualities make up wilderness character. However, we do not pick and choose which of these qualities to emphasize. Well, we do have to do some of that. But we also have to realize that wilderness is a single resource. Um, and the Wilderness Act, identifies it as like a resource in the singular, an enduring resource. Yeah. And so the definition of wilderness describes its parts, and each quality is important in itself, but we also have to think about the synergistic whole. So these tangible qualities have properties for example, that they can be improved or degraded by management action or inaction. They can also be improved or degraded from effects inside or outside of wilderness by actions and forces that may be intentional or unintentional. In considering the qualities of wilderness character, it becomes apparent that there can be complex interactions between the qualities. We'll talk more about that, some of those specifics. But for example, addressing a threat to improve one quality may result in a new threat or degradation to another quality. So let's take a look at how these qualities are defined and more specifically how they interact with each other. And Jimmy and Michelle, like if you wanna like add something, just feel free to jump in. So let's start with untrammeled. This is an unusual word that trips people up in getting the meaning right. The key concept here is that untrammeled is defined by intentional actions that are manipulate components of the ecosystem. So intentional manipulation of the ecosystem. This is about intentionally manipulating, or not. This quality is about not intentionally manipulating plants, animals, or natural processes. It's also not about creating restrictions on what people in the wilderness can do. This is about the ecosystem when we talk about restrictions on what people can do for recreation or other activities, that gets captured under outstanding opportunities for unconfined recreation. We'll talk about that later. This quality is about having humility and realizing we don't always know it all, and we don't always know what is best for wild nature. Based on that understanding, we try to manage with restraint and respect for the autonomy of nature. Some examples of what this quality is degraded by include prescribed fire, suppressing fire, killing predators or otherwise altering predator-prey relationships, controlling invasive species, etc. The other thing about trammeling is that it may occur by agency action or be carried out by the public, and so may be authorized or unauthorized by the agency with jurisdiction. Trammeling actions should be carefully considered. Sometimes they can be done for good reason. So it's not always possible to avoid trammeling, as there's sometimes good reasons to do it. Let's talk about the natural quality next. The natural quality is about protecting native species and their natural habitat, with the ecosystem being substantially free from the effects of modern civilization. So the National Wilderness Preservation System is only about 5% of the total area of the US. And with technological civilization constantly marching forward, it seems more and more difficult to keep ecosystems natural. However, there are often good reasons to try to keep these areas natural, and this can lead to manipulation of ecosystems or trammeling that we just talked about. So, examples of that are like managing invasive species or prescribed fire. So there's this conflict or tension here. We try not to make it about one versus the other, which is a unique and challenging management task, right? When we want to try to holistically address wilderness character preservation. So achieving that, we're after achieving a reasonable and practical balance between untrammeled and natural qualities. And this balance often means acknowledging trade-offs and being prepared for what is gained or lost in this attempt at balance between qualities. as I read at the beginning, the Wilderness Act Statement of Policy mentions a major reason for designated wilderness is so that expanding settlement and growing mechanization does not occupy and modify all areas in the U.S. So the undeveloped quality is an important reminder to maintain wilderness as a place with minimal and primitive developments, or a place with primeval character and influence, as those words appear in the Act. Section 4C lists prohibited uses, and so those are an endeavor to keep wilderness undeveloped. So according to this section, there shall be no roads, commercial enterprise, motor vehicles, motorboats, mechanized transport, motorized equipment, landing of aircraft, structures, or installations. As you may know, there are exceptions to these prohibited uses when that are laid out in the Act or sometimes in other laws, but Section 4C in the Wilderness Act asserts that these are to be used minimally in administering the area as wilderness. Okay. So, outstanding opportunities. I always like to emphasize outstanding opportunities. And this kind of has three components: solitude, primitive recreation, and unconfined recreation, right in this single quality. So overall, this quality focuses on tangible aspects of the setting that affect the opportunity for people to directly experience wilderness and connect with the place, with nature, with their heritage, etc. It directly relates to personal experiences in natural environments relatively free from the encumbrances and signs of modern society. So you may remember that domain as part of the Venn diagram we talked about earlier. So a review of research suggests, and this is all from Keeping It Wild too, a review of research suggests that solitude encapsulates a range of experiences, including privacy, being away from civilization, inspiration, self-paced activities, and a sense of connection with times past. Maybe you can think of other aspects of that. But solitude would be degraded by the sights and sounds of people. So this could include other groups of people as well as any of those prohibited uses I talked about. Primitive recreation has largely been interpreted as travel by non-motorized and non-mechanical means, for example, by horse, foot, or canoe. These muscle-powered methods of travel reinforces our connection with our ancestors and our heritage. However, primitive recreation also encompasses reliance on personal skills to travel and camp in an area rather than reliance on facilities or outside help. Primitive recreation would be degraded by facilities that decrease the need for self-reliance for traveling in wilderness. Unconfined recreation involves attributes such as self-discovery, exploration, and freedom from societal or managerial controls. So unconfined recreation would be degraded by anything that works against those things. This might include controls such as permit requirements to carry a bear-resistant container for food, closures, etc. We can also think about primitive and unconfined recreation experience as an ideal opportunity for physical and mental challenges associated with adventure, where there's real consequences for mistakes and personal growth from facing and overcoming obstacles. I'll also mention that there can be a tension between solitude and unconfined recreation when agencies put restrictions on entering or camping in wilderness. That, usually these are to help preserve solitude, but this degrades unconfined recreation. Finally, other features of value. This last quality comes from the last part of the definition of wilderness in the Act that states, wilderness may also contain ecological, geological, or other features of scientific, educational, scenic, or historical value. Generally, we think of this as features not covered by the other tangible qualities or are special and unique to the wilderness area. So examples of this include sacred sites, archaeological sites, historic properties like cabins and lookouts. I think of singular scenic resources like Denali the mountain around McKinley, or possibly endemic species to that wilderness area. So degradation clearly would be damage or loss to these identified features. These features should be thoughtfully considered and formally identified in a planning document or wilderness character monitoring plan. They shouldn't be like kind of just introduced willy-nilly as they're convenient to some specific kind of person or group. So what I want to ask you to do next is take a few minutes here to answer these questions on the screen. And kind of the first question is to make this connection between that value or benefit you identified at the beginning with which of the 5 tangible qualities does that best fit under. And then once you've done that, think about what actions or what non-action or restraint is needed to ensure your value or benefit quality of wilderness character is preserved. What does it take to preserve that? And in doing so, do any of conflicts with other qualities come up to preserve that particular value, benefit, or quality? Yeah, so I want to come back to this kind of this thesis I brought up earlier about preserving wilderness character is how we secure the benefits of an enduring resource of wilderness. And now each of you has had the chance to make connections between values and benefits that wilderness provides and the tangible qualities of wilderness character. You've had a chance to think a bit about what it takes to preserve those values, benefits, and qualities, as well as some of the tensions or conflicts between them. In doing this, we've engaged in some of the thinking that's central to the endeavor of wilderness stewardship. Hopefully, this exercise has given some meaning to this statement that I'm positing here, and something you can keep in mind as you go forward. And these are based on key ideas that Congress conveys in the Wilderness Act. So what does distinguish wilderness from other public lands? Remember, I promised we'd get back to this question. Let's explore that. We talked a bit about it's somewhat unique that Congress designated the National Wilderness Preservation System that's managed by different agencies. I say somewhat unique because I think of like Wild and Scenic Rivers has a similar type of situation. But each of these 4 agencies has this one primary mandate of preserving wilderness character, which is a unique mandate. Thinking about how the Wilderness Act frames protection and stewardship of wilderness lands, there's a few key points right from the language of the law, and I've heard some of these come up in our discussions. Wilderness is defined as natural and may also contain unique natural and cultural features. There are other federal land types or designations that are protected for these general qualities, but what makes the National Wilderness Preservation System unique is that we have this undeveloped quality that's part of the definition of wilderness, part of the legal definition, with an explicit list of prohibitions, including, like I mentioned in Section 4C, commercial enterprise, roads, motorized equipment, landing of aircraft, mechanized transport, vehicle use, structures, and installations. We've talked about solitude and this quality of outstanding opportunities. That's certainly unique in the Wilderness Act and something that many people value. And then also untrammeled, very unique to the extent that it's not commonly used word and it can be kind of confusing and makes management tricky because it's in quite a bit of tension with the natural quality. We've considered wilderness values that people hold and the benefits that flow from wilderness. Given the unique nature and size of the National Wilderness Preservation System, these are some of the important benefits. And as I mentioned, this is just one way to organize those benefits. There are other resources and folks that have thought about benefits kind kind of in different frameworks or in more depth. So I'm putting some links to those in the chat that you can explore. And then some of those benefits on the previous slide are not necessarily exclusive to wilderness areas. They may come about because of other land protections, just general public lands, national park designations or others. And so here my predecessors in the Park Service came up with a list of benefits that are mostly unique to wilderness, and these are slightly adapted from that website. You can look at the website in that link I shared. But anyway, there's a prioritization of non-mechanized recreation. That's a special ethical meaning and designation for wilderness. This commitment to exercise humility and undertaking actions that affect nature, protections for outstanding opportunities, ecosystem scale preservation, or at least when there's smaller wilderness areas involved, hopefully, while they are an important piece of the puzzle for ecosystem scale or landscape scale preservation. There can be cascading benefits for adjacent public lands. So, adjacent lands can benefit from the wildlife habitat that's next door or the natural condition. And this is going to also amplify benefits of protected areas. And I think of like the national parks, being from the National Park Service, but we have the NPS Organic Act, which has a similar kind of conservation and use and enjoyment direction from Congress. And so wilderness areas can amplify the benefits of national parks as well by adding something on. All right, thanks, Julia. Thanks for keeping us on track. And have a great rest of your day, everybody, and enjoy the rest of the sessions.
Thank you to our great presenters.